All right. Good morning. Hi, I am Noelita Lugo, a daughter of an immigrant, a product of Texas public schools, a public sector professional, former at-large trustee, and a mom of a second, sixth, and ninth grader. My co-host today with me is Amy Moore, and co-organizer who is not able to be with us today is Sharyn Vane. I want to give appreciation and thanks to the Austin Council of PTAs for partnering with us and providing the virtual space and translation services to enable this event. And thanks to all of you for joining us for this critical conversation about the state takeover of independent school districts, a growing trend that raises urgency about local control, the impact on students, staff, and families, and the future of public education in our state. As a reminder, as you may have seen or heard, this event is being recorded right now. Translation services are available in Spanish. You can go to the chat. Si necesitas traducción, puedes ver las instrucciones en el chat. We also ask that you please hold until the question and answer segment, hold any questions until that time. And we are asking that folks either drop their questions in the chat or requests come off mute. We have about 15 to 20 minutes for questions and answers. So if you average about 3 minutes per question, that's about 5 to 7 questions. So it'll go pretty quickly. We also have ground rules posted in the Zoom chat. This space is for learning, reflection, and action. So I invite all of y'all to think deeply, ask questions, and consider how together we might support all of our schools, advocate for TEA transparency, and protect our local governance of education in Texas. With me today are Dr. David DeMatthews. I believe Ruth Kravitz is joining us as well, Thomas Siege, and Brandy Halliday, as well as Reverend Trey Comstock. You can see their bios. There's that will be dropped in the chat, so I encourage folks to take a look at that for more information. All right. Under Governor Greg Abbott and the Texas Education Agency Commissioner Morath, independent school districts across Texas are seeing state control remove locally elected school boards, override community decision-making, and impose down control over our children's schools. These takeovers are often framed as efforts to improve academic performance or fix governance, but many educators, families, and advocates have experienced something very different. Our panelists today will discuss what's behind TEA takeovers, what it's really like for students, teachers, and families when this happens, and how communities have responded and how our community may respond. All right, with that, Dr. DeMatthews, I'd like to, first of all, welcome and thank you for being here. I'd like to start with you. Can you give us a little bit of background? What triggers a Texas Education Agency takeover of a school district? How has that process evolved over recent years?
Sure. And thank you for having me, and glad to see so many people on a Saturday morning joining us to talk about Texas education. So the law as written right now gives TEA the power to take over districts. But I just want to say that it doesn't give them any sort of plan or unique insight into improving the quality of education in schools or building trust with families. And so just as a backdrop, I want to acknowledge that. So TA can intervene in a school district for academic, financial, governance, or special education related failures. And there's a mandatory takeover trigger where any campus that has had an unacceptable rating for 5 consecutive years and that turnaround plan for that school fails, then the commissioner has the authority to either close the campus, appoint a board of managers for the district. There's also a special education kind of trigger for noncompliance with IDEA. And so we've kind of seen over time an evolution of these policies, including kind of the commissioner's authority to take over schools for specific reasons, and then kind of linked to our A through F accountability system and how that can change from year to year or even within a year, has an impact on kind of how schools are rated, which then opens the door for the TEA and the commissioner to take over a school district. And so we've seen this trend kind of evolving over time. But I will say this, and so there are laws. It is legal, obviously, for the state to take over a school district, but commissioners in the past have kind of less frequently used it, and it seems that we are now in a kind of state where the commissioner is using it more and more. And still, regardless of the fact that there's a law, I think that there is certainly some selective behaviors and politics that go into why, say, Houston was taken over as quickly as possible, but like IDEA public charter schools were kind of languishing with all sorts of financial and governance issues that were pretty clear, but didn't trigger that kind of takeover right away. And so while there's a law, I think there's also a degree of selectivity and a degree of discretion that happens when the state makes these decisions.
You so kind of let's turn towards, I think you mentioned this in your response, but what narratives, can you give some examples, right? What narratives are often used to justify that state intervention? I think you gave some examples about like the difference between Houston and maybe IDEA charters, but help us have a little bit more context around that part.
Yeah, I
And
think
whose voices, oh, sorry, doctor, and whose voices do they tend to amplify or silence?
yeah. So I mean, I think um, the state puts forward a narrative that they are um, seeking to ensure that every child receives a high quality education in line with the state's constitutional duty, and our A through F system and the system in which the state can intervene is the mechanism for improving. And so strong state authority, which is ironic in a state like Texas that likes to preach that it values local control, standardized accountability, and this kind of oversight over special education are the kind of the narrative that the state uses to take over school districts. But the reason why I say I think this is both selective and bias is, districts that are taken over, they are disproportionately urban, they're disproportionately high poverty. They serve mostly students of color. Many of the districts that have been taken over, such as Houston ISD, Beaumont, they serve student populations 80 to 95% Latino or Black. There's high levels of English language learners. And, it does not take a PhD in education to kind of see the relationship that exists between race, poverty, star scores, and the inequality in our school finance system. And so the fact that takeovers almost never happen in more affluent or majority white districts, I think is a troubling concern. And there are examples of kind of some suburban schools that have struggled, that have more affluence, that don't have that same sort of intervention. So I think that's an important kind of context here, especially when you think about language in Texas. So districts under takeover often have larger populations of emergent bilingual students, so students who are learning English. I think that's a big issue. And then we just know our state is very segregated by race and income. And, as TEA mapped out the A through F campuses across the state, and when you look just right along the I-35 corridor, you see kind of the long-standing lines of racial segregation that still kind of exist in our state. And you see, schools on one side of I-35 receiving, lower grades than schools on the other. And so if poverty and segregation are highly predictive of student outcomes, even in a system that is, claims to be, include, closing gaps. I think there's a real issue there. There's a real bias there. And then again, who's leading the idea that, charter schools like IDEA, who have all sorts of problems, don't get taken over, but Houston does, or doesn't get taken over quickly, and lets this problem fester to a pretty significant degree. I mean, I think that raises a lot of
TEA
concerns.
Takeover info session. I'm just curious because
Let's,
I didn't.
if somebody could mute thank you. All right. Great. Thank you, Dr. DeMatthews. Appreciate the background and the context. I'm also thinking about there was a recent news article that highlighted some of the takeovers, right? We've talked about Houston ISD, mentioned Beaumont ISD, also Edgewood ISD, and then folks have maybe heard that Fort Worth ISD is kind of one of the next school districts that take. So, Dr. DeMatthews, kind of, from your vantage point, what does this rise in takeovers signal about the future of public education in Texas?
Well, I mean, so I do want to say I think there's a lot of room for improvement for our schools and our school districts. I don't. I'm not here to say that public schools, their superintendents, their principals are doing everything perfectly, or there's not room to improve. But what I see in this system is all the accountability being placed on one group of individuals who are increasingly not empowered to actually have control over what they're being held accountable for. And so the state has a massive shortage of qualified teachers, special educators, school counselors, educational psychologists. Schools need these people to help meet the diverse needs of their students. Public schools are not in the job of creating an educator or a workforce. That's the state's responsibility, and they have failed at that responsibility quite miserably when you look at what's happening right now in Texas versus other schools. And so what I see is a system that places all of the responsibility, and there should be some responsibility because not every district is making all the right decisions, but putting all the responsibility on superintendents and school boards and teachers and principals, and they're avoiding it themselves. And the example I'll give to that is if you look at how the commissioner has run TEA, or just look at the number of debacles, botched testing, misscoring items, problematic procurement, a special education cap that is absurd to even think that anybody working in public education would think that this would be okay. I mean, there's just a long list of failures at the state level. So what this kind of shows me is that there's not a lot of accountability at the state level for the individuals responsible for creating those constitutional conditions to have a free, public, efficient system of education. It's all pressed down. And so I think it's a very fair and biased system. I think it's very problematic. And I think it's why you're seeing more districts come under fire, especially as the legislature has failed to adequately fund public education. And even after the recent legislative session that added some money and made some teacher raises, still behind where we were 6 years ago.
Thank you, Dr. DeMatthews. Yeah, it makes me think of some questions that we may get toward the Q&A portion. Sometimes I hear folks say, well, why don't we just not pay recapture? So we questions like that, but I'll reserve that for later. But my kind of commentary as I'm listening to the context that you're sharing, it seems like the state wants to have its cake and eat it too, right? They don't want to invest in public education, or maybe they want to make selective investments in what they define as public education, like, using taxpayer dollars for private education vendors. And they also want to have their cake and eat it too in terms of who gets under the microscope when there's issues around accountability. But with that in mind, kind of thinking about what's it feel like. Let's kind of move to the next segment of our virtual meeting today. And Mr. Siggy, we'll start with you. Thank you again for being here. Can you share with our audience what were some of the stated reasons behind TEA's intervention with Vermont Independent School District? What did they say they were intervening for?
Well, Dr. Matthews definitely hit the nail with the hammer concerning why they take over, but they haven't solved one problem. They haven't fixed one district that they've taken over. Not one. Normally they leave it in shambles with what they did with BISD. They took over BISD for financial reasons. We had a CFO who had embezzled $8 million. And that's when TEA stepped in. And I'm saying that they didn't help us because they mentioned a RIF as a way to settle the financial issues, as opposed to finding out how many teachers were going to retire. They created a RIF, and then 100 teachers retired, and 100 teachers left the district for job security, going to surrounding districts. We are still in the hole right now, trying to find certified teachers to fill that gap. And as Dr. Matthews said, that's statewide. We just can't find certified teachers. And there's a possibility that they will take over BISD again. And all it really takes is one school who is not, that is subpar and has not made the grade for 5 years. That's what happened in Houston. One school, Phyllis Wheatley, did not cut the mustard, and that's how they got their foot in the door with Houston ISD. But what saddens me and what bothers me is that they have not fixed anything. To my knowledge, and anyone on the feed can correct me if they know one district that the state has fixed, period. They haven't done anything, and I think it's an assault on public education. Plain and simple, it's just an assault. The governor holding back money for all of these years, knowing that the school district needed it. He basically held us hostage until he got what he wanted. That's no way to run public education, because the Constitution says that students are entitled to an education. But at every turn, the governor has curtailed the needs of public education. And the commissioner is obviously in the same boat with the governor, with TEA. And it saddens me. My wife was an educator. I'm on the school board. We see the problems with the education, and they've done nothing until this year. You give teachers a raise and you put money into the coffers. So again, we're struggling because of what was done when they done the takeover. What they appointed was people with fiscal backgrounds, and all they was concerned with was money. Nothing about education. They done nothing to enhance the education of Beaumont Independent School District. Nothing at all.
Thank you, Mr. Siggy, for sharing your perspective. I am going to look toward my co-host. Maybe they can signal to me. I don't think Ruth Kratz has been able to join us yet.
No,
but
not yet, Noelita.
Okay. But I'll open this up to Brandy and to Reverend Comstock, if y'all could, we're shifting a little bit right from Beaumont to Houston, but from your perspective, what were some of the immediate impacts and consequences of the TEA takeover as y'all saw it?
Hi. The immediate the immediate consequences for the takeover, I would say, I mean, they've been catastrophic. There was a purge of the central office, purging of certified teachers at the targeted campuses, and my beef. um, all of the targeted campuses, the so-called NEA campuses, all of which are Title I, lost their libraries. And this was immediately after Dr. Millard House, the previous superintendent, who was hired by the elected board. One part of his 5-year plan was to make sure that every school library had an up-to-date library and either a certified librarian or a media specialist working in the library so that all students had access to a library regardless of zip code. That is no longer the case. There are no functioning libraries left in the Title I campuses. We are hemorrhaging teachers. I say we, I am no longer with HISD since I was a librarian. The janitorial staff has been reduced. Probably one of the worst impacts, I would say, because we are a district with a high number of students in poverty and students in Black and Brown communities that need additional support, is the gutting of wraparound services, which had been funded by ESSER funds and had significant positive impacts on the communities because there was a wraparound specialist at every campus who was immediately able to fulfill, immediate needs. So you have I need more coffee, but the hierarchy of needs, food, shelter, water, safety, you have to have those met before you can even start the process of learning. So to have a wraparound specialist on every campus, making sure that students had shelter, that they had food, that they had clean clothes to wear, so that they could come into school and then learn. And the final nail was hit this summer. There are no more wraparound specialists at all. They've been replaced by these so-called sunrise centers, which are scattered throughout the district. They are not easily accessible. Almost from what I've heard from other community members is when you call, nobody answers. So they're really just a front to say that he's meeting the needs of the community.
Thank you, Brandy, for sharing your experience. It truly does sound traumatic for everyone involved. Reverend Comstock.
I think I would characterize it as the immediate impact is we went from a school district that had its challenges. As I was a teacher in an urban school district before I do the thing I do now. Urban education at that scale in those settings is challenging. So it was a school district with some real challenges. We went, but was locally controlled. To one characterized by top-down imposed chaos. So my daughter's school, Durham Elementary, is in the middle of an HISD takeover, even though it slipped from a B school to a C school. And that has now led to, we have had a 25% staff turnover since teachers reported in August. So that is 8 teachers of the 32 have left or been reassigned since the beginning of August. That's not counting teacher turnover May to August. That's just And so it is. I think what what happens over and over again is everything is done in a top-down manner, and everything is done extremely quickly and extremely chaotically. So, for instance, the superintendent, F. Mike Miles, was on the campus for an hour. At the end of that day, two of the top performing third grade teachers were gone. They were just reassigned, just like that. And so I think one of the things that has been playing out throughout HISD is just a massive amount of collective trauma as programs that have been in place gone, wraparound services gone. One of the things that happened at Durham is, last year 2 years ago when our data was a B, we had a wraparound specialist and we had after school tutoring. We slipped to a C, weirdly, the year that we lost wraparound specialist and after school tutoring. Instead, to solve the slip, no, data's supposed to go up, not down. It was a good Teacher America Corps member. I know data go up, not down. But we had these key changes. The data slipped a little bit, slipped 6% overall and 13% in closing the gap. What we saw is now 25% of the teachers are gone since day one. Our library has been turned into, it has a new name, but it was previously called the Team Center. The curriculum that had been producing pretty decent results had been gutted and replaced with district curriculum, and doing all of this with no additional funding. And so I think that is the thing that is happening. And I know the Durham experience the most, and I don't know how comparable that is to other takeovers. We're experiencing the F. Mike Miles specific version of the takeover. But in our specific version of the takeover, it is top down. It is often extremely quick. It often seems to maximize trauma and stress on the system, and never seems to take in. It applies, shall I say, education research selectively. And so there certainly is like research-based aspects to the instruction, but it leaves out all the socio-emotional pieces that also impact students' achievement. And so we end up with a lot of schools where students and teachers are just getting yelled at by roving administrators having to directly apply the Miles method. I mean, literally, our principal said on the announcement yesterday, or 2 days ago, please be Miles ready, whatever that means. And so again, it feels very top-down, very targeted, extremely chaotic, and often seems designed to maximize stress and trauma.
Thank you both for sharing that perspective. I'll open this up to the whole panel. Maybe one or two of y'all can chime in on this one. I've heard from parents in different parts of Austin kind of contemplate out loud, wonder out loud. If TEA takes over a school district, is it really that bad? Right? I think each of y'all has shared some of the response to that answer. But I've also heard kind of like whisperings of, well, if TEA takes over, if the state takes over a local school district, isn't it really just going to impact some kids? It's really not going to impact the entire system. So, and then they kind of ponder what that might look like depending on where their particular campus or campuses are. I was going to ask Ruth about this, but do any of y'all have a couple of things to say in response to that wondering? Yes.
I mean, so there's a labor market for teachers. People don't have to stay in Houston ISD. When there's disruption, a lot of times people will opt out of the entire school district. And a lot of times these reforms do spread throughout the district as kind of the nature of bureaucracies. And I want to kind of point to history really briefly. There was already a Houston miracle, like so-called miracle, which is already what we're seeing Superintendent Miles and his organization kind of pushing that things are going positive, and there's a big media blitz in pushing it. But in the early 2000s, kind of similar to today, Houston was celebrating some dramatic gains. This ended up kind of influencing the passing of No Child Left Behind and the fact that like states should put this top-down regime in. But in reality, behind the scenes of this so-called miracle, there was dropout data manipulation, there was cheating on tests, there was a toxic pressure cooker culture where principals and teachers faced extreme, pressure to raise test scores above all else, a prioritizing of resources just focused on a narrow measure. And it was a disaster. It was a complete disaster. And so I think it's shocking to me, this was only 20, 25 years ago, that not only did the state take over that same district, but it now has a superintendent in many ways already manipulating who takes the STAR exam in which years, which was reported on by Texas Monthly and several other outlets. We're seeing teachers leaving their positions, principals leaving their positions because of scripted curriculum that it's like so-called kind of aligned to research, but isn't. And so I just want to say that, like, I do think it very clearly we're seeing kind of history repeat itself here.
And I want to add that it did, like in HISD, it didn't stay limited, right? Every year, more and more schools are being impacted and mandated to do the Miles method. A year ago, Durham Elementary was running their own curriculum, what had a lot of autonomy. Their data slipped a little bit. Again, slipped 6%. Not 6 percentage points, 6%. And now it is mandated curriculum, team center, principal roving the hall shouting at students and teachers. And so if you like, what I would say is, and a lot of the reaction we've seen from our parents is I think a lot of our parents thought they were safe from this. And like, oh no, like that's happening over there. And that's not like great in terms of like civic unity. We should probably care that it's happening over there. But it is easy to sit in that place where we go, oh, I know that's happening over there, but that's not happening at my school. And I'm sitting, I was on campus yesterday, listening to a teacher who, used to write curriculum for the district, being like, I don't know, I don't even know. Like that, you can just feel the stress palpable. And so what I would say is these kind of takeovers, because there is absolutely no local control and essentially absolutely no check on what can happen. For us in HISD, the impact, the number of schools impacted has just expanded every year. To the point where even I hear from some of our top performing schools that they're getting pressured to start applying more of the Miles method.
Thank you, Reverend. I appreciate that. Um, Thank you so much for y'all's perspective. I want to pick up something that a couple of y'all have mentioned, and then turn it back to Dr. DeMatthews for a moment. So, who holds the TEA, the Texas Education Agency, accountable once it does take control over a district? What does it look like on paper, and what does it look like in practice? And then, just really briefly before I mute myself, I was reading a recent article where the TEA spokesperson said, oh, well, TEA doesn't take over your district, right? We choose people from your local community to take over your district. And, TEA isn't responsible for the outcomes. It's the people who are running the system locally who we just happen to appoint. So, I'm sure folks can interpret that however they wish. I certainly interpret it as you want to have your cake and eat it too. You want to take over school districts at your will, and you don't really want to hold yourself accountable. But that's my 2 cents. Dr. DeMatthews, can you tell us a little bit more of who does hold TEA accountable when these takeovers happen?
Well, that's kind of how I started in saying that there's not a lot of accountability. Um, you would hope that the governor and the legislature would look to see at the outcomes of state takeovers, and not just outcomes measured by STAR, but overall outcomes in terms of how students are being served, how actual parents and families feel about their public schools. And so I think over, nearly a decade now, there's not been a lot of accountability for when TEA takes over a district, what actually happens, what actually improves. And that's not just to be honest, I'm a researcher. From a research perspective, none of this is unique, unfortunately, or surprising. When states take over districts, researchers on average don't find any improvements in student achievement outcomes. They often even see declines. There's an erosion of community trust. There's a reduction in family engagement. There's often increased spending per pupil. We're probably seeing this happen. Some debts arising because there's often a lot of pressure by the state to show quick results to justify their decision. And these are smart people. They know what the research says about takeovers. They're doing it anyway. And so I think in a lot of places, unfortunately, there's not a lot of accountability. Accountability comes on voting day, and I think the Texas voters care a lot about public education, but they're split on a lot of different issues, and that's allowed this very ugly status quo of poor state leadership in special ed to kind of perpetuate these problems and even repeat the darker sides of history, like what we're seeing happening in Houston.
Well, thank you, Doctor. And welcome, Ruth. How are you this morning?
Oh, I'm doing great. I'm sorry. I thought it started at 10:45.
Oh, no worries. We're here. So we're moving to for folks following along, we're moving toward the community response. Like, what can we hear about kind of past and current takeovers? And Mr. Siggy, I'll start with you and kind of then bounce around to other folks. So in thinking about what y'all experienced in Beaumont, how might have can you describe for us how you've seen the role of a trustee, of an elected trustee and then a sitting trustee, evolve in your particular community as you reflect on what things may have been like as a trustee before the takeover, during, and post? Kind of, yeah.
We have been more engaged with the community. Normally being a trustee, you would probably spend 15 hours a month being involved with meetings and stuff like that. Well, right now I'm probably spending 30 hours a month being involved, not just with the meeting, but going to the schools, interacting with the community, trying to get the community to buy in. Because, I learned very quickly doing governance is that student outcomes change when adult behaviors change. It's just that simple. You do need your community to be engaged and involved in order to enhance the educational outcomes. It's just that simple. And I want to touch on something Dr. Matthews said. I don't know who holds TEA accountable, period. I don't have a clue. But the people they appointed on the board here in Beaumont had no educational background, none. And from my perspective, they weren't interested in education. All they focused on was money, finances. They never instituted any program to enhance education. They didn't give any raises to the teachers. They didn't do anything. So it lowered the morale of the district. They never gave anyone, like I said, no one got a raise. There was nothing really positive other than when they rotated off the board, they were able to say, we got the finances in order. But you left the district in shambles. So we got money, but morale is down. Teachers are leaving the district. Nothing to brag on. And then we still talking about the Miles Martyr. He's tied in with Third Future Schools. TEA is pressing people to use the model for Third Future Schools. Something's wrong with that. Well, you got the superintendent of Houston Independent School District that's also tied in with Third Future Schools, who's trying to press districts to use Third Future models. It's absurd. But it takes the community, and as board members, we are all actively involved with our community. We have to get the community buy-in because the community's attitude has to change. in order to get the outcomes that we need from the school district. It's not, we're not building a bomb, we're not doing anything. We have to engage the parents and the community to get involved with our kids. That's the only way that it's gonna change. And again, I think throughout the state of Texas, throughout the country, we're struggling because bad decisions at the top level and a lack of certified teachers teaching our kids. We have 100, not 75 subs on a permanent basis. We have teachers from the Philippines in our school district teaching. Great, but there's some language barriers, some cultural barriers. And our president held up 60 of them, which is the immigration thing. So they got to be ISD late. So it's a whole combination of factors. But for any district out there, engage your community. You have to get your community involved in the process. Because our community was in an uproar when they appointed conservatives.
Thank you, Mr. Siggy, for your commentary and perspective. I want to ask some other folks their thoughts as well, but I'll chime in on a couple of things I heard. So when I served on the Austin ISD board, we were and still are under Lone Star governance, LSG coaching, and absolutely one of the first slide decks that we watched. It said repeatedly, student outcomes don't change until adult behaviors change. And my 2 cents is what I would really love to see is our adult behaviors change at the state level, and investing in public education that serves the majority of our students across our state. That's rural, suburban, urban. And so that'd be a great adult behavior to change. I'd love for them to reflect on that and follow up. Now, picking up on a couple of other threads, you mentioned that the amount of time kind of spent on community engagement. And yeah, when I ran for trustee, my particular family situation and my support network was different at that time. I had my youngest child was 2.5. And so over time, it became really clear to me that yes, absolutely, just like you said, Mr. Siggy, like we as elected trustees, this is in my at least, we do have to be out there, and it is incredibly time consuming, and we do not get paid for that work, right? Like many things in our society, the things that benefit the greater good often either don't get paid or don't get paid well, but that's for another topic, I suppose. It is very time consuming, and I knew I wasn't going to be able to live up to my own standard, which is why I chose to step down. I've got a kid in each elementary, middle, and high school, so 3 drop-offs, 3 pickups every day, plus working full-time and managing my house. So I just wanted to kind of give a shout out to all of the elected school board members who do not get and who are asked to do this work day after day, who take on the obligation and the responsibility bestowed upon us by voters. And it constantly feels like an uphill battle. So I shout out to all of the electeds. Kind of picking up on the other thread, community engagement. So Ruth, if you could kind of share for us, kind of thinking about what it's been like over there in Houston, how has the community supported not just their like the outgoing board members, but how has the community kind of rallied around, and what are some concrete things that y'all did? Oh, hold on, I need to unmute you.
I'm good.
There
Thank
you
you
go.
for your patience, for me joining late. So my name is Ruth Kravitz. I'm a retired teacher and administrator and a proud parent of HISD graduates. And in Houston, we had the luxury of forming a multiracial community group of parents, students, teachers, and community from all across Houston in the last smaller takeover under Terry Greer. So unlike other takeovers around the country, there was a coordinated group of parents, teachers, and community ready to speak up. So, the only good thing about Mike Miles is that he's an equal opportunity oppressor. The things that have been done in Black and brown communities quietly for many, many years, endless turnover, principal churn, endless test prep. He's done this to more affluent families who, for the first time, are experiencing a really repressive school system for their children. And the only good thing about that is it gets a lot more people involved and a lot of people with more time on their hands. So before the takeover, the spring before the take, for many years, we've been pushing back against the takeover, supporting school board members who realize that state takeovers don't improve student learning, don't improve the communities in which students live and thrive. And 6 months before the takeover, we rallied people and had lots of protests. We had the April before the takeover, 2 months previous, there were 30 schools that participated in protests. 500 kids on one campus had a peaceful protest walking around their schools, and parents had gave free donuts out in front of the school to inform everybody what was going on. At the time, people said change is good, public education. I'm sure you're experiencing this in Austin right now. Things aren't perfect in public education. Maybe this will improve things. And the thing I want to share, and I think everybody here knows, is change for its own sake is never a good thing. Change to improve the conditions in which students learn and the conditions in which teachers teach is always good, and this takeover has been anything but that. So we have actively engaged the media because they are our allies. When you lose your vote, what you do is you need to focus on the things that you have power over, and that is people's voices. So we've helped parents, teachers, and students find their voice to speak to the media, to keep records of what's going on, and we have cultivated media who can understand this. Unfortunately, if you live outside of Houston, since so much of the coverage is hyper local, except for the Guardian and Washington Post and other national news, people like the horrible things that are happening with Trump, it's like drinking from a fire hose, and we no longer feel horror at this Roald Dahl dystopian thing that's happening to our children. So before I continue, I just want to, and because of that, people are talking about this at length. There are university professors who've done op-eds saying this is what the error-ridden curriculum looks like, and parents and teachers say, who would have a classroom where instruction is stopped every 4 minutes? We are stopped in the middle of a lesson because you are observed 3, 4, and 5 times a day, where teachers are walked out of their classroom in front of kindergartners and escorted out of the building, never to return, where teachers who play chess with their students after final exams are escorted out and fired, where teachers who take 3 days off to visit their child who has cancer and they have too many days off and then they are fired. And so I think one of the useful community responses is powerful public protest, collaborating with the media, and we have engaged every single elected in Houston and across the state, from city council to state legislators, to encourage and in many cases successfully get them to speak out and use their bully pulpit. We fought back on, for the first time in our lives in Houston, Progressive voted against a public ed bond. It was a $4.4 billion bond, but what Miles has done is out of control spending. He spent 3 times. There's 3 times as many people making over 200K. He spent $500,000 on a musical about himself, and he built a little TV studio for propaganda purposes, costing taxpayers $3 million this year. He fired 60% of the custodians and maintenance workers, so the air conditioning systems are no longer being serviced. If you defer maintenance, then things become truly horrible. And he's lying about test scores. and the public is sharing this. We also formed a commission, but before I go on with that, because I know I was very tardy, so I'm trying to put two question responses together. The thing that I think is really important is that lying, when said with some people, like Mike Miles, are really good prevaricators. So in February each year, he says 95% of the teachers are happy with their job and talks about this publicly. And of course, 40% of teachers each year, the first 2 years of the takeover, have been forced out. That's 8,000 teachers total. There are 11,000 teachers last year, 10 this year. He also said that parents are satisfied with their schools and that schools are improving when in fact we have to public information request this information. So people in Austin, I'm going to ask you to learn how to do open records requests really, really quickly. TEA is open, HISD wasn't. And
Right.
yeah,
Ruth,
you want me
I'm
to
so
stop?
sorry.
Yes.
Yes, because we have
Oh, got
3 minutes left with Dr. DeMatthews. The rest of us will stay on for Q&A.
Got it.
I've loved thank you so much
Thank
for
you. Yeah,
sharing all of that. I will I am going to toss it back to you, I promise. But Dr.
thank you for
DeMatthews,
giving me the time.
before you have to leave, when in 3 minutes, uh, how do these interventions reshape the symbolic role of schools in communities beyond academics, right?
Yeah, that's a great question. And sorry for having to leave. I'm actually teaching class right now. I have students working, but yeah, I mean, I think so. What you heard even from Ruth, right? So schools do a lot of things. They do a lot of things that unfortunately a lot of other government entities are no longer doing. They're often a community hub. They're a place for parents to gather. In Houston, they can be a place for shelter amid a natural disaster. Kids get counseling. There's social workers. There's just a variety of supports. There's sports. There's just a variety of things. We did not create a system of public schools to have students take STAR. That was not what the people who wrote the Texas Constitution had in mind at all. That was not in any way the intent of this system. And so this increased this top-down accountability and the increasingly narrow focus on producing, however, that is some type of test score bump to justify this is really destroying the core principles of public education writ large. Schools, especially in communities that are struggling with poverty, with limited access to healthcare, with housing insecurity. Schools play this are really the last institution standing in a lot of places, and that's being undermined with these takeovers. And that's being undermined when you have district leaders that were never educators, that were never trained to be educators, that are either adopting for their own self-interest or out of ideology market-based approaches, which have not led to improvements in education because kids aren't widgets. Education's not a widget. It's not something, it's complex. And so I think what we're seeing in Texas is just the erosion of one of the greatest American institutions that have ever existed, and that's public schools. And the way to turn this back is to do some of the things like Ruth says, is to, as much as possible, engage in the political process. Because one thing I will say before leaving is I don't believe the majority of Texans of any faith tradition, political party, color, creed, believe that this is right. I think it's just a matter of getting folks knowledgeable about what is happening to Houston ISD and really to public schools across the state that are struggling to pay people to just do work that we all believe is necessary as Texans.
Thank you, Doctor. We appreciate it. And thank you so much for joining us. We really do
Take
appreciate
care,
your time.
everybody.
Thank you. All right, y'all. So I do want to at some point move toward the Q&A. Let's just 5 more minutes with this panel on a couple of questions. So Ruth, is there more that you wanted to make sure we highlight? And then I'd like to ask a question of Brandy and Rep.
Noelia, I'm going to try really hard to be short and not speak without breaths in between. So I think something that people do need to be aware of is, of course, and here's my disclaimer, test scores are not the measure of student learning. So the challenge is we have to the public on both sides of the aisle are tired of standardized testing. Texas is one of only 6 states to still use standardized testing for graduation or the A through F rating system. That having been said, there is something that Marath and Miles are repeating at every juncture in every corner, and that is that in Houston ISD, these are the biggest academic gains that have happened at this scale in US history. I think I'm giving a direct quote. And I think my answer would be that these are the biggest manipulation of test scores that have happened at this scale in our country ever. And it is like the giant charter proliferation. So I'm going to give 3 examples for people. Try to keep them very short. So when you leave and go back in Austin and they say the miracle in Houston, we want to duplicate it, this is something that has failed. So some of you have read the Texas Monthly article about biology and algebra. If you haven't, in the first year of the takeover, what Mike Miles did is he removed 70 to 85% of ninth graders from biology and put them in remedial science, leaving only the honors kids to take biology at the end of the first year. And of course, as you would suspect, there was a huge bump in scores. And since ratings are based on achievement or growth, this was perceived as a huge jump in ratings, but it came at the great expense of Black and Brown students in underrepresented communities having denied access to AP courses when they're seniors. And that continues now because he's continuing this process, delaying biology 2 years. He's pushed out more students who are complicated than has ever happened before. This is, of course, the charter mythology that you purposely exclude the most complicated student to artificially raise scores. So he did the biology manipulation, and then he did this really wicked thing where he canceled algebra in 8th grade at schools serving poor Black and poor Brown students. He just canceled it. So kids who traditionally year in and year out at these schools were successful in 8th grade algebra so they could take calculus as seniors and be college and career ready in the real sense, not the false CCMR sense. They didn't have that access. They were dumped into 8th grade math, which meant that they automatically passed the 8th grade math test. The 8th grade math test counts more for accountability ratings than passing algebra. So it boosted the middle school rating. And those children who normally never take algebra in 9th grade are suddenly in algebra in 9th grade the next year, boosting the high school rating. And this year, what he's done, and we promised we would try to stop it, is after 3 weeks into the school year, he moved 50 to 80% of on-level juniors out of Algebra 2, the class that kids take all over the state, and he dumped them into remedial algebraic reasoning so that they would take an online course and get a quality point for CCMR. The details aren't that important, but it's so that they get a more remedial class. They can't take pre-calculus before they graduate, and it raises the rating of high schools. And the shameful part about that is that just like everything else, a friend of mine said this is depriving a generation of children in the largest city in Houston, in the state, in the 4th largest city in the country, from equity and access and in parity and participated in college and career readiness. So it's shameful and it's horrible. It's like somebody looking me in the eye. I've gained 80 pounds since I graduated from college some years ago, and I'm still happy with who I am. But it's like saying to me, Ruth, You weigh 100 pounds. I know I don't. And if you say it thousands of times, it will not make it true. He is saying he's helping kids and he's farming them irrevocably. So hopefully those little details are helpful.
Those details are very instructive, and I have so many comments about that as someone who grew up in Houston. But let me let's take 4 minutes. Mr. Siggy, Brandy, Reverend, if any of y'all want to kind of chime in, and you can raise your hand or somehow signal to us. What's next, right? What should Austinites know? What should general public? Honestly, I wish I could broadcast this across the state and have folks pay attention to it. Maybe with the help of other community members, that can happen. But what advice, where to go from here? Yes, Trey.
Yeah, I can start. I mean, I think one of the pieces is I want to keep reiterating if you think a takeover means that your school, which you think is fine, isn't going to be impacted, that's not a guarantee. And that is certainly not what has happened in HISD. And so the more passionately that I can declare, if you think this is not going to be your problem, we should care simply because we should care about other people being impacted in our cities. But also the way these things go, because it is essentially unchecked power. Certainly, we're watching this play out time and time again in Houston. I think the other thing, to kind of echo a little bit of the amazing work that Ruth has done, is the more kind of cross-community connections, cross-city connections that you can build, so that you don't feel isolated. I think that's something that we at Durham Elementary are really working on. Is we're running up against the limits of our own individual voice as a school. And so the more relationships you can build across the city, if you are not familiar with the communities of color in the broader Austin area, I encourage building those kind of connections in particular. And so that we are able to present more united fronts. Because one of the easy lines that Mike Miles dumps on us all the time is that the communities of color are totally happy. It's just the, hysterical, NIMBY white people that are mad. And that's not true, by the way. It's objectively untrue. But because there's still work to be done for us in Houston of building those broader coalitions, it becomes a really easy way to bat us away of like, oh, it's just these hysterical affluent people. All these other people are totally happy, and actually, it's all the other people are working 3 shifts and don't have time to go to a board meeting.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Yes, Brandy.
So I'm going to piggyback off of Mr. Comstock. And Ruth has been a great example in how to build community across the various neighborhoods of Houston. And I would urge you, it is not too soon to start. There's no such thing as too soon to start building those community connections, especially if a takeover does happen. You're going to need them. Around here, Mike Miles is known as a community breaker. Like, that is literally one of his goals, is to break down school communities so that there's less resistance. So if you know that ahead of time and you start strengthening those connections now, then you have that much more strength to oppose issues that come up during a TEA takeover, and you have that much more voice to speak for your communities, especially like Trey was saying, when there are people who are working 3 shifts, they don't have time to come to board meetings. But people in the low income communities know CVPE. You can reach out to us. You can share our concerns with us, and we will show up and make a stink at board meetings and voice concerns. And I would also add, in addition to, building those community coalitions, also start thinking about, the possible, and we've talked about them. So start thinking and anticipating and planning for those possible negative impacts and ways that you as a community can mitigate them. Like, you know, the loss of wraparound services. There, you know, various community members got together in the spring and started stockpiling needed resources that could be distributed to families that we knew who needed them. Should we have to do that? No. But we will have, you know, if the school is failing in its duty because local control has been stripped away, then that is something we as local community members can do, is support our community when the schools are not providing those resources.
Thank you, Brandy. I do want to kind of be mindful of the time. It is 11:12, so we're going to shift to the Q&A portion and see how many questions we might be able to get in, and then some closing statements. But see here. So I'm just pulling from the chat, folks. If for some reason I don't get to your particular question, or you're wondering, you know, is she doing it in chronological order? I'm just doing my best on Saturday morning. I missed my 7-year-old's soccer game, so let's have a little grace with each other. Thank you, Ruth. Okay. Okay, so this question from chat says, how was enrollment impacted pre and post TEA takeover? And there's a second question, but let's start with that. Mr. Siggy, yeah, might you be able to kind of speak to that, and then we'll turn it over to the Houston folks.
Well, we lost student enrollment, several students. They went to charter schools, believe it or not, because of the way the conservatives were managing the district. So we lost students to several of the little charter schools that came up here in Beaumont. And once again, I do not understand TEA's desire to kill public education. When all of our children are entitled to a quality education, and you're doing everything to stifle it. I don't get it. I mean, I had an excellent public school experience. My children have all had an excellent public school experience. And I just, for the life of me, I don't understand why our governor is trying to kill public education. And I had a very successful career, you know, joined the military right out of high school. And it was that education that took me all the way to the top of an enlisted man can have. My wife has a doctorate degree. All of this came through public education. You know, we got all of our footing at public education. And then one time they cared, the state of Texas cared about educating students. And now it doesn't appear to care whatsoever. And I agree with everything that was said here today. We have to mount up, and for Austin, get everybody involved that you can before this happens. That would be my.
Thank you, Mr. Siggy. And I'll oh, yes, Trey.
Durham, I can't speak of HISD across the takeover.
I can.
Say since Durham started being taken over by the district, we've lost 28 students of 510 since the first day of school. I mean, that's that we can verify. We don't like get direct numbers, but that's what we can verify. We're keeping a list, like 28 students of 510 since day one.
And I'll say it quickly. In the 5 years before the takeover at New Education System schools on the east side of town, there's been about a 3% annual turnover. First 2 years of the takeover, it's 6%. Each year in HISD and in non-NES more affluent neighborhoods, it was 1.5%. But it's accelerating. So families are leaving for private and charters and leaving town and abandoning Houston. So it's going to impact business and everyone else. So I think the estimate this year was 8,000 students less, and now it's already 11,000 students, and it's not October yet. And just one final little piece, Community Voices is Black, brown, white, rich, poor, all geographic areas. So we don't have to reach out to other communities. We are all communities working together. One of the good things about an Austin community group that's would form or in Fort Worth is it gets parents from communities who've never met each other to start living and working together in ways that, because of the bubbles we live in, there's the bias that impacts things. And it gets parents who think teachers are mean and teachers who think parents are lazy to realize that we're walking this path together, as Mr. Thomas is saying, to improve public ed. And as DeMatthews says, it is the cornerstone of a thriving democracy. So everyone here, we're changing the world because we're here today.
Thank you so much, Ruth. Oh, yes, Mr. Siggy.
Just real quickly, I seen the blur come across. It's not just TEA, it's the Republican Party as well, who is trying to trash public education.
And I'll add a little, just very briefly, and then we'll move to a different question. So folks who know me here in Austin, you may know my backstory because I shared it when I ran for school board. So I am a daughter of so my mother, Otomi from Mexico. She finished up to sixth grade. Long story short, came to the U.S. My father was born in South Texas, so in the Valley. In fact, he was born in 1929. I was a surprise baby. He was 47 when I came around. He earned a GED. So those are my parents, and I did well in public school. I was a compliant child. I liked learning and kind of get tracked to advanced courses. I entered the University of Texas here in Austin as a sophomore with AP credits. I earned 2 degrees in 3 years. I then later go on to earn a master's degree. To me, when I hear my story, when I hear Mr. Siggy's story, when I hear anyone's story about how public education allowed them to access opportunities that otherwise would have been closed to us, that makes me wonder and really kind of answer my own question. Why not invest in public education? Because people who can move upward economically, because people who have access to knowledge can question the systems that we're in. But with that, I will move to a different question here. There's actually one from earlier in the chat. It says, how were the board of managers chosen? And were they actually from the community? So Ruth or Mr. Siggy?
I'll do quick, and this time I think I'll try to promise to be quick. 7 of the 9 board members come from affluent neighborhoods west of downtown, and the 8th is somebody who pretends to live in, for those of us who know Houston, pretends to live in Trinity Gardens, so it lives in a $1 million mansion. So they were not chosen to represent the community. They applied, and they were chosen for their compliance. They had to attend a bunch of Lone Star governance training, and those who were sufficiently manipulated into believing in the false narrative were chosen because we had people on the inside trying to get picked. 4 of the 9 board members, who were mostly rubber stamping all of the takeover decisions since the takeover happened, did express concern with the out of control spending on the budget last year and were behind closed doors unwilling to give Miles a raise and a bonus. And Miles went to his friend Marath, since this is a anti-democratic system with no safeguards regarding local control or an audit function or anything. And he said, get rid of those 4. I want my bonus. And Morath got rid of the 4 and replaced them with more compliant, more out of touch individuals. And just did it in a wonderfully manipulative way. No, that's enough. So they were chosen in a completely anti-democratic way. And no matter how it's presented, it is the worst of all things. There's a reason we live in a democracy, because we can vote out people when they do jobs that we don't believe in, ideally.
Mhm. I see you, Mr. Siggy. Are you, there you go.
All of the people that they appointed were affluent people. And all they were concerned with was money. Nothing about education, just money, money, money. Car dealer, two of the guys own dealerships. They all own businesses within the city of Beaumont. None of them had a public education background. None of them were teachers. These were people who come from affluency and who understood money and not the needs of the educational system.
My 2-second editorial is kind of tracks with a certain kind of thinking, right? The best people to make decisions about something are people who don't know anything about that thing. So moving to a different question. So tips and taps for folks who aren't familiar with the acronym, and I'm going to take a run. So targeted improvement plan and turnaround plan, that tip and tap. There was a question saying taps and tips seem like an early version of what happens in a TEA takeover. What advice can you share about pushing back against taps or tips? Ruth, I'm not sure if it's in Houston.
Your question is really the answer. Any school improvement plan that says that that promotes turnaround, replacing the principal, replacing the teachers, implementing a lockstep curriculum is going to have negative consequences. So I would say what pushback that people can do is continuously repeat that there's no evidence that teacher turnover improves learning for students. And you can use forget the name of the organization, but they estimate that in large school districts it costs about 25,000 per teacher to replace them when you think of all the training that's involved. So, and this is sort of a segue into we can't win this just with community and just with electeds, although we will be hopefully replacing the governor next year. And then the first thing he can do is replace the TEA commissioner who can end the takeover at any minute. I know that was a question somewhere else. How do you get out of a takeover? And in Texas, laws are written by legislatures and agencies set the rules. And so the exit criteria could be changed at any minute, and they could end the takeover tomorrow. I think the thing we forget is grass chops efforts. So we do a lot of grassroots work. We work with the media, but we need to work grass tops in Austin specifically, since you're under the gun. Get business leaders to talk about how the turnaround models are antithetical to what happens in business. Firing your way to excellence is something that the corporate community has thrown out the window long ago. So that's what I would say. Push back with facts and figures and the fact that this hasn't been successful in other communities. And that's why I said things about test scores, because even though we don't believe that they are the mechanism to understanding if students are in fact learning, it's the propaganda that's being used and we need to rebut it. So thank you a lot for that question.
Thank y'all both. Do you have another question? It's slightly modified from what I saw in the chat, but it's connected to what I hear out in the community from some folks. So, here in Austin, dealing with school consolidations, school closures, which has a connection to Mr. Siggy, what you mentioned earlier, a RIF, right? A reduction in force. And at the same time that we're confronted with a number of schools that either have an F or have received multiple Fs. And in those conversations, sometimes I hear folks ponder, why can't we just, why can't the school board or why can't the administration just like fight TEA why can't the school board just tell the TEA to leave us alone? Ms. Siggy or anyone from the panel, what are some initial reactions to that type of question?
TEA controls funding and a lot of other additional things that the district needs in order to be successful. There's a little school district around here in Bone. I'm trying to think of the name of it. It's a very small school district. They out of the STAR test. They just said they weren't going to do it, and they don't rely heavily on funding from the state. We're not a big district, but we have 16,000 students, and I wish we could. Maybe we ought to think about just telling TEA take a running flying leap off the cliff and see what they would respond to. My mate suggests that that's one way to fight back. It just and we actually have a meeting with him on the 30th. He's coming to Beaumont to determine what he's going to do with Beaumont. Maybe we'll determine what we're going to do with him.
Thank you, Mr. Siggy. And again, my 2 cents is, for folks who might be asking, well, legally, right? Like, what if there's a lawsuit? I really encourage folks to just take a quick peek at what that track would be in the court system, and then what judges would actually be hearing those types of cases here in Texas, who appoints judges at kind of the highest level when you're doing those appeals, right? Those court appeals. And I'm so sorry that we don't have time for all of the questions or to do deep dives. I do ask one of my asks, and then I'll hand it over to analysts. One of my asks is, back in 2019, I was just an angry parent who was learning about public education in Texas, was learning about public education here in Austin, and a 2nd grader. And I got mad enough to then turn around and run for school board. Even as people told me, well, you have kids and you probably might not be able to do it. My ask to the audience members is, I and the co-organizers, with technical support from ACPTA, we pulled this together. There's nothing magical about me or my co-organizers. It is going to take each and every one of us in various capacities. We don't have to all spend 100 hours a week doing the work we need to do to make a difference in Texas. But if each of us finds our place, our niche, and does what we can, I still believe that we can turn things around for Texas and for our country. But let me start with Reverend Comstock. What final words or closing comments would you like to share with the audience?
I think it's making sure that we are separating the what, whys, and hows, right? To own that change is needed. If there are failing schools in our community, that means something needs to change. But there's a difference between a need for change and how these changes happen and why these changes are being implemented. And so the more that we can do together as communities to say, yes, we are really passionate about public education and in improving outcome of all students, then and pushing back against these takeovers that have no evidence base in actually improving the students. But it doesn't help us to just say hey, look, everything's fine, or everything's fine in my little corner. It's to own that hey, change is probably needed. But then talk about why the change is needed and how we can come together as communities to change.
Thank you. Brandy.
It is really important to work together as a community and to communicate and stay aware of not just what is happening in your little corner where everything might be fine, but also look at what is happening in other areas of Austin ISD. What kind of support do community members and families need to advocate for their schools? And silence will not save you. That's exactly how we have gotten into this situation at multiple levels. Because, I on the inside, I saw a lot of colleagues, really trying to be compliant and, oh, let's just not draw any attention to what's going on. And that does not save anybody's job. That does not save anybody's school. That thinking that, oh, if we just, I mean, it's like being in a hostage situation, which I don't personally know about, but compliance and being quiet is not going to make the situation stop, and is not going to save you if the ultimate goal is to, destroy the school system. So you need to be loud, throw a fit, have protests, talk to the media, get with community members, and be as obnoxious as possible. Don't give them a moment of peace if you are not happy with how they're handling your school district, because it is your school district, not theirs.
Thank you, Brandy. One quick thing before I hand it over to Bruce and then Mr. Siggy. So when I used to work for the state, I used to tell parents who were involved or engaging with our particular system, I'd say persistent and polite. Persistent and polite, and document heck out of everything, right? Who did you talk to? When did you talk to? Right? Persistent and polite. Persistence, and thank God for people's resilience. Ruth, any kind of final comments?
I think I'm going to amplify what you said. Obviously, I wish you had been my school board member, Mr. Sagi. I wish you'd been my school board member. One, people should run for elected office because otherwise we leave it open to extremists or corporate reform apologists or takeover supporters. Right now, I think I put it in the chat, there's a slate of end the takeover candidates running for the elected position. They won't be able to, they don't have power to vote on decisions, but there are three things. They can amplify the message to the media. They can deprive extremists from getting the position and using it as a stepping stone. And they can learn what is necessary to learn because it's humongous, and be ready to lead the minute that we beat this takeover, which, as I said before, could be tomorrow because the exit criteria are made up. And the public doesn't know that. I had a spirited conversation with a former school board member who said, "No, Ruth, I think you're wrong." So we went to I said, "Let's look at the documents." And she said, "Oh my God, I didn't realize this. This is going to change the way I talk to the community about this." The second is what both Noelia and Brandy and Trey have been talking about, which is speaking out speaking out. And there's two things that we don't do enough of. Teachers, if every teacher said, "I will not do this harmful curriculum," this AI error-ridden curriculum where you give 4 PowerPoints a day to kindergarten kids and then test them. And everyone said, "Here's the books and we're reading them in class." You can't fire everyone in every building. The problem is if it's 4 teachers in one school and 4 in another, they can fire 4 teachers in each school. So school by school, you build your power. And then I say, we think strategically, like you said, persistent and polite, persistent and focused. And once you hit 40% of teachers who will do a thing, they start doing that thing, school by school by school. And the same is true for parents. And Durham is an example. But also there's examples all over the district, Pew, and so forth. If they're locked out of the building and grandparents like at Durham were told they're going to have lunch on the outside, then you keep on going in. So if every parent in the city volunteered in the school as eyes and ears so that's what I would say in Austin. increase the number of parents who are showing up as VIPS volunteers and volunteering in the classroom. And when a grandmother and a 2-year-old toddler and the daughter are forced to stand outside the building for 45 minutes before they're allowed in, this is inappropriate in a democracy. You just keep on coming back because there is power in numbers, and we know what's right. Serving children, helping kids achieve their dreams, and imagining a future that's beautiful and rich and powerful is why we're here. So that's my answer.
Thank you, Ruth. Mr. Siggy.
I'll be very brief. Community engagement, knowledge is power, and it's gonna take the community to fight back. And as Ruth said, if you can get people together and say we're not teaching this crazy curriculum, not just one or two, if you get everybody on one accord, it's gonna make a change. But I am so thankful I'm a part of this right now because y'all giving me some ideas. And I'm the board president for BISD, and I'm gonna deal with Mr. Morath. I'll make him run. You know, I went to a conference 2 weeks ago, and that joker exited out the back door. He's done his little 45-minute thing, and he went out the back door. He did not want to be confronted by trustees and board members. He does that all the time. He comes, he says what he want to say, and then he goes out the back door. What can he do to me? I'm not an employee. I don't get paid. You know, I'm volunteering. This is my time. Can't fire me. But I'm so glad I'm a part of this because I've gotten some ideas. And I think that as a group, advocacy is very, very important to the process. So thank you, Amy and Ms. Lugo.
Sharyn and Noelita.
I appreciate you, period. And this is the way to fight back because knowledge is power.
Thank you so much, Mr. Siggy. And yes, absolutely. Knowledge is power, and we are stronger together. I believe it to the core of my being. And I'll throw one more thing in. Thank you again to our audience for staying with us past the half-hour mark. And I'll say one more thing. For anyone who says, well, why can't the board members just do the right thing? I hear you. I hear you 100%. And as the community, have that collective power to come together, regardless of where we live, regardless of where our schools may be, regardless of whether the kid in school or not. That's on us. We have that power. So thank you for staying with us. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to ACPTA for allowing us to use the virtual link and for ACPTA arranging translation. And thank you to our translators for translating as we may speak a little quickly at times. All right, with that, have a great Saturday and upwards and onwards. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.